Okay, so hi everybody. I'm Alison Palmer. I am a poet and editor with Broadstone Books. And this is Samantha Ratcliffe with us. She is also a poet and senior editor at Broadstone Books.
I am
I,
glad to be here.
yeah, I would like to welcome everybody listening and watching. This is the second show, only the second show of Poet Speak with Broadstone Books. And today we have two very special guests with us. We have Luisa A. Igloria and we have Lee Marshall. Today, among other topics, we're going to discuss eco meditation and what that means, and ecological poetry related to Luisa and Lee's work. I'd like to open with some readings. So we're going to have Luisa open for us. She's going to read from Call Bearer, which is her newest collection out from Black Lawrence Press. Beautiful cover. Thank you, Luisa. And then I'll tell you a little bit about Luisa and then we'll hear from Lee. Luisa, you're on.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm very excited to do this with you because I realized, like maybe a couple of weeks ago, that it's coming on the first birthday of Call Bearer. It came out on August 24 last year from Black Lawrence Press as part of its new, not new, Immigrant Writing Series prize. So let me read two poems. The first one is called Flora of the Tropics. In our wild gardens we grew, no apples goldening in late light, no pears or plums. What animals nosed their way into our simple plots, tore pages from tightly bound greens, leaving fiddlehead ferns to sleep undisturbed by the shed. If any star fell into the belly of an apple, we did not hear about it. We did not cut its flesh crosswise to find a sign about our origins and fall, our banishment. In the smudged fields, tubers marbled patiently, waiting for us to pull them up and out of the earth like babies. What crescents crowned their arrival? And of the air, roots of orchids spoke to each other in their own vernacular. Of flood we knew nothing until galleons pushed their way into the channels. Of grasses we knew which could bind and which could forge canopies to repel rain. How are we blind and how misled when we've coaxed stones into terraces leading to the gods? Laid end to end, they would make more than a girdle for this earth.
Thank you.
Thanks. I read one more, also from Colbert. This one is History as Catalogue of Phantasms. Noon with its white horse and houses of plague, evening with its shrouded owls, biology of illusions. Everything we wear and shed and shoot borrowed from the ransacked past. Domes of churches glow pink in the sunset, made beautiful by all these curtains of smog. In their shadow, vendors with oily trays of beads and amulets. There used to be a zoo somewhere in the heart of the old city, emaciated elephants, drying pools where they kept a mermaid dressed in verdigris. I wanted to ask her how to play this instrument that seems designed for continuous mourning. I wanted to ask her about how to be in two places at once. The heart swishing in a mason jar, womb space bluing the water.
Thank you so much. Those are
Yeah,
thrilling poems.
thank you.
Two of my favorites.
Thank you.
Yes. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Luisa. She has written 14 books of poetry, the most recent, Call Bearer, from Black Lawrence Press, that is going to be a year old, as Luisa mentioned. She's also written five chapbooks. She is lead editor of Dear Human at the Edge of Time, Poems on Climate Change in the U.S., alongside Eileen Casanetto and Jeremy S. Hoffman. From 2020 to 2022, Luisa served as the 20th Poet Laureate of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and she was one of the 23 Poet Laureate recipients nationwide of a 2021 Poet Laureate Fellowship from the Academy of American Poets. Originally from Baguio City in the Philippines, Luisa is a Louis
Louis.
Lewis, I. Jaffe Professor of Creative Writing and English, and from 2009 to 2015 directed the MFA Creative Writing program, an absolutely wonderful program at Old Dominion University. You can find Luisa's full bio on her website, luisaigloria.com.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And now we're going to hear from Lee Marshall, and she is going to read from her newest collection, her debut collection out from Broadstone Books called The Slow Hammer of Roots. Hi, Lee.
Hi, thank you so much, Alison. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Um, the first poem I'll read is actually the first poem in the collection called The History of the Grass. First, it was just the sun pulling us in slices toward the sky, clinging soil, nitrogen, and chlorophyll, distant shushing water, and later shrill cries. The first hoof startled us. We learned to spring back. We held rain at our uttermost fingertips, sheltered spiders among our waists. We colluded with the devourers, learned the secret passages from gut to dirt and back to wind. We shuddered at the trees. When you came, we bent our necks beneath your soft feet. You passed among us as we nodded, and we grew. We grow the world. Through us twines your bread and flows your milk. We are the grain and the cow. Where your body falls, we hold your shape. We spear through time. After fire, we are the first to return.
Thank you, Lee.
And then the second poem is from kind of a linked series of what are called future folk tales. This is Future Folk Tales Forest. If you visit the forest, they said, listen for their breath, for the long breath they drew when quiet finally came. Inhale of a depth still unfolding, because forests breathe millennia, and we will not live to see the exhale. But in the quiet, at long last, you will hear the susurration of birches, water droplets held in lichen cups, sipped by birds, the diligence of ants and the love between them. Moss tells green stories, and you will hear them and be joyful and weep for a long time as the tree's great roots surge beneath you. Fungi electrify the rich and bleeding soil that is never still, never quiet, but whose voice is only heard by the weeping and the dead.
Thank you, Lee. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about Lee Marshall. Her debut collection, as I mentioned, is called The Slow Hammer of Roots, and it's out from Broadstone Books. And actually, Samantha was supposed to do that, but I totally forgot. So, Samantha, do you want to continue so we can have you jump in here?
Hey, I don't have to. It doesn't matter. Regardless, I think that you guys are both bringing brilliant poetry, and I think this is a really wonderful pairing. Um, so I'll go ahead and read it, the rest
We
of
want to
it.
hear a
Where
little bit of your voice too.
it's okay. Yeah, so debut poetry collection, The Slow Hammer of Roots from Broadstone Books, and her individual poems have appeared in forthcoming are forthcoming in Rogue, Agent, Swim, Hayden's Fairy Review, Deode, Thrush, and elsewhere. Her work is also included in Attached to the Living World, a new eco poetry anthology from Trinity University Press. Lee's writing and criticism have also appeared in Dance Magazine, Dance International, Women's Art, the NPR's National Public Radio's Morning Edition, and elsewhere. She currently works as a grant writer for Grant Flow and previously served as director of research for Virginia Commonwealth University School for the Arts. And she was also associate chair for VCU's Department of Dance and Choreography. So you can contact Lee through her LinkedIn page and on her Facebook. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam. So I know that we personally, Sam and I enjoy your work because of the focus on nature and the eco poetry aspect, the ecological lens that you both write through. It's interesting. Luisa is curating an anthology on focusing on climate, and then Lee is included in an ecological poetry anthology, and I thought that was really neat. So, Lee, let's have you talk to us a little bit about eco poetry, and tell us a little bit about your writing style with the slow hammer of roots and how your book functions as eco poetry.
So, thank you for this question. I, because this is a first collection, it's pretty eclectic. But there's always been a thread of interest in the natural world running through my work. I don't know that I would have said I was setting out to write eco poetry. It was like later that it became clear that that's what it was, or that's what
Mhm.
it's called now.
Mhm.
Um, so I, the poems, there's the poems in the book that are concerned with nature. There's a through line through the future folk tales, which kind of came all in a rush during a 30 poems in 30 days challenge that I did in 2022. But a poem like History of the Grass is actually from like 2012 and was a much earlier investigation into, uh, I guess, like an empathetic investigation into the living world around us. So what would the voice of the grass sound like?
Mhm.
Or what would it have to say to us if we listened? And so I guess I think of eco poetry as a kind of a form of attention or attempting to listen or dial in to the world around us that we're always encouraged to ignore and if not trample upon. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's interesting. You lead me into, I was going to ask you about future folk tales and
yeah.
that narrative. So, can you talk a little bit about that narrative?
Yeah. So 30 poems in 30 days when you're working full time and you have a kid and right, it's an intense practice. And 2022, that was the summer of 2022 was an intense summer, the way they all seem to now be. But I wrote one, which is the Fox poem, that's and I was quite startled by it. Because of the grief that it contained. And then but I also really was compelled by it and thought, oh, maybe I can write more of these because the idea was very much about like this kind of telescoping in time. If we looked forward to a future moment that was looking backward, but the past it was looking back to was actually still in the future of our current. Like it's this strange extending forward in time and then back, but still forward. So I wrote a whole series of them, which I think almost all of them are in the book. And it really was this kind of cathartic expression of what I didn't really understand until then to be a huge well of grief, of like climate-based grief. Um, and so there's a lot of anger underpinning some of those voices. It's like the animals are like, how could you not, how could
Mm.
you not understand, right? There's a lot of that that came through those poems. And they are not, the origin of this collection, but they really do kind of define it.
Yeah, it's interesting the different voices. I love hearing through nature in from the different lenses, the grasses and the folktales, and it's all beautiful. It's very gentle, but it's very commanding. And you do hear and and envision this little underpinning and wave of discontent and anger, and it's done beautifully. Luisa, describe your style of writing in Call Bearer and how eco poetry works within your writing. And then we're also going to talk about your narrative threads.
Sure, sure. And first of all, I really resonate with a lot of what Lee just said in answer to that same question. I love the description that you just said earlier about how time is working both forward and backward, and how it's really necessary to cultivate a sense of deep attention to the world. And I think that's really our primary job, not only as poets, but as human beings. And I also want to thank you for this question, Alison. It gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit more about my own personal background. I grew up in Baguio City in the Philippines, which was turned by the American colonial government into a hill station in the early 1900s. So Dean Worcester, who was then the Secretary of the Interior, had asked a native guide to take him on a birding trip. And the story is when they came to that part of the mountains, which is where Baguio is located, he exclaimed at how it reminded him of New England with the cooler temperatures. It's 5,000 feet above sea level and landscapes of limestone and pine. So the area is also rich in mineral resources, gold, silver, copper, perhaps not as much now as it was then because of all the extractive economies, right? But Chicago architect Daniel Burnham was commissioned to draw up the blueprint for the Hill Station as well as for Manila. So the reorganization of space aimed to clearly demarcate public and government from recreational and residential spaces separated by parkways and a network of roads. And so a lot of indigenous place names were replaced by colonial designations like Session Road, Cabinet Hill, Harrison Road, Malcolm Square. But even today, it's possible to see the original layers in that palimpsest. So my childhood home there, which no longer also exists, was near Kisad Road, and Kisad means a condition of trance experienced by a priestess when she's doing a sacred rite. The market was near Abanao or Wide Street. Chanum Street near the park meant water, and there was a neighborhood called Lukban because of the groves of flowering citrus that used to grow there. So I've always written about place and by extension, the histories that surround and impact place. And in light of the many ways we have to increasingly acknowledge how everything is undeniably connected, I think it's safe to say that every text, every artifact, every expression cannot not be connected to their ecological environment. So, is there time to say a little bit more? Because
Oh, please. Yes,
yes,
absolutely.
this reminded me of how in 1899, in a speech to a delegation of Methodist church leaders, President William McKinley at the time defended the annexation of the Philippines by invoking the idea of manifest destiny. And I won't read the whole excerpt, which is like 2 paragraphs long, but I'll pick out a few sentences. He said, "When I realized that the Philippines had dropped into our laps, I confess I did not know what to do with them. I sought counsel from all sides, but got little help. I thought first we would take only Manila, then Luzon, then other islands perhaps also. I walked the floor of the White House night after night until midnight, and I'm not ashamed to tell you, gentlemen, that I went down on my knees and prayed Almighty God for light and guidance more than one night. And one night, late, it came to me this way. I don't know how it was, but it came. One, that we could not give them back to Spain. That would be cowardly and dishonorable. Two, that we could not turn them over to France and Germany, our commercial rivals in the Orient. That would be bad business and discreditable. Three, that we could not leave them to themselves. They were unfit for self-government and would soon have anarchy and misrule over them worse than Spain's was. And so there was nothing left for us to do but take them all and to educate the Filipinos and uplift and civilize and Christianize them, and by God's grace to do the very best we could by them as our fellow men for whom Christ also died." So this is like the whole passage is like really the definition of manifest destiny, right? And I have a poem in Callbearer, which is epistolary. It's also addressed to Daniel Burnham, that architect of those blueprints, saying, hey, it was not the case that there was nothing there before you guys came. We were there, right?
Mhm.
So I hope that wasn't too digressive a way of answering your question, Alice.
No, not at all. It's so interesting. And speaking of which, I would love for you to read another poem. And if you'd like to read that poem, or I think we had you, were you going to read Callbearer? We can read
Yeah,
both.
yeah.
You want to read?
I can read Callbearer, the type of
Yeah.
I
okay.
so appreciate that look into history, though. I thought that was so interesting to hear. So thank you for bringing that to us.
Thank
Um,
you.
in in our first episode, we talked a lot, not to divert again, but in our first episode, we talked a lot about research and how, getting to that deeper research in poetry is an act of love. And I think that is something that you're doing in this book. I can't wait to hear this.
Yeah, thanks for those words. So, call bearer, when a newborn emerges with a call, which is basically part or all of the amniotic sac over its head or body, the midwife or doctor quickly releases the child so it doesn't suffocate or it's not endangered. Anyway, it's also considered a talisman, it has talismanic properties, and or that's the superstition that supposedly a child born with a caul over its head is gifted with second sight. Whether or not that's true, in many cultures, I think that's also something considered in the same way. Caul bearer, pheasant and nuthatch, five-petaled flower, emerald feather suspended in veils. We don't know how long the world can hold such specimens of tenderness, how far the glacial drifts can ferry such tombs, immaculate, before they themselves turn into ghosts. Everything writhes before the dream discards what it calculates for reduction. And yet the yucca moth delivers its eggs inside the flower, even as leaves sharpen their bayonet points. At dusk, we scan the horizon for anchors and tents. We lean into the wind, hungry for the brass tinkle of hawk bells and the trance-like drone of hegelum. If we split these reeds down their length, how many of us can ride out the coming flood before sunlight returns or we've softened into moss?
Mm, I love that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lee, would you read us one?
Yeah, I actually just the direction that we're kind of moving. The another major thread in my book is ancestry, and the roots, and the title refers to both the natural world and the roots of ancestry. And I come from the colonizers, right? And the enslavers. And so that some of the work that came out in the um, putting this manuscript together really dug into that thread. So, and also I think is a very different uh, direction from which to approach the question of place, and like who is in place and how and under what circumstances.
Mhm.
So I have, uh, I'm trying to decide, but I think that this is a shorter poem that I think it's very compressed, but a lot of what I'm talking about is in there. It's called Ancestry 2. A Zen koan asks, "What was your face before your parents were born?" My face was tree roots, a snail shell. My face was a million years of tides, like yours. My face was cardinals in Virginia grass. My face was land theft. My face was enslaved Sarah Jane's suffering when my great 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 grandfather reached for her again. My face was his wife's strong hands and stifled sobs slowly turning her heart to a nest of snakes she would pass to her children one by one. My face was the innocence of those children before they took the teachings as their own. In my great 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 grandfather's pocket at Appomattox was my face in his clenched fist, standing next to Lee signing the instrument of surrender. My face was their shame at losing the war. My face was their relief. My face is all our eyes and what we choose to see.
Mm. You know, Lee, I was going to talk to you, this is in the same vein, about your poems that focus on dictator. And I'm so curious because there are so many narrative threads in here, but they all work so well together because it is place, it is ancestry, it is nature, it's ecological. It all works so well together. Can you talk a little bit about the that narrative?
Yeah, the dictator, there's three dictator poems, and they're actually quite old. They're from I don't know, 2011, 2012. And they were inspired by I learned that there was a correspondence between General Manuel Noriega and a little girl back in the 80s. I think like a little girl wrote to him and then he replied, and there was this there was and I I just thought this was so strange
Yeah.
and compelling, and I wrote these three poems kind of in the, trying to sit in what that might have been. Um, and so the and I guess when you pulled out you noted that your interest in the one dictator poem, which was sort of an imagining of what he might have like his youth. I was surprised because I just they are a little anomalous to me in this collection, but I'm very attached to them, and I think there's interesting threads that come through because of them, including a kind of natural metaphors as a way of investigating deeper into this guy and his
Yeah.
strange kind of domination, but his willingness to entertain the innocence of this young child, and her interest in him as simply a human person. And I think that the empathy that is clearly revealed in the fact of this exchange having actually happened is what was so compelling. Like, here's this terrible person, who also had this exchange with an innocent exchange with a young person, and somewhere in there lies pathways through conflict in general, right? And I don't know, it's more complex. It's certainly not Pollyanna to think like, oh, the little children could lead them, but it's yeah, it's compelling to think like that any character, as horrible as they may be, is multifaceted, and there are ways to connect between the most unlikely people.
Yeah, I wanted you to talk a little bit about that because I did find it fascinating. And we're and Sam mentioned, last time, the last program we talked a little bit about research and a lot about history. And I'm noticing that along with all of the amalgamation of topics and themes in both of your works, history does come up a lot, and finding our place in history and noting our place in history and where we've come from and also where we're going, and then creating history, um, imagining it. And Louisa, you utilize repetition in a similar way that Lee does with the idea of history and natural history in various titles. And it works so well to weave your narratives together. So I'm wondering what the impetus behind that was. And also, I'm wondering if once you latched onto that idea, was it a great form of a writing prompt for you? When you latch onto these little narrative threads, does it work
Oh
to
yeah.
help produce
Yeah,
the writing?
absolutely. It's like bingo, right?
Hmm.
But anyway, natural as well as other histories are, I know, we think of them as ways of recording, cataloging, and archiving information. But as we're aware, the pictures shaped by such records are wont to tell the stories of those who have the power to disseminate those records and stories in the first place. And also, there's this notion of how history is supposedly the past, And therefore, there's this certain sense of how the past is over. You can do nothing about it, right? But I want to take these ideas of history and natural history and consider other kinds of stories that have not made their way into the formal archive. And so I think in my own way, I want to draw more attention to the idea that any, I don't know what you call it, grand canvas of history cannot exist unless formed of the multitude of smaller and more personal, intimate stories on the ground of our experience, which, not everybody is able to perceive because we're so, isolated from each other. But finding my way to these kinds of poems can indeed, and they did serve as a kind of prompt, as you put it, a way to keep thinking about the subject of what is natural in the first place and what is history. And basically, it's such an inexhaustible and interruptible, if that is a word,
Mhm.
subject. And so I love that you can mess with the past in this way.
I love it too. I love that you do that, both of you. So this also leads me into sort of our last topic of conversation before we hear more from both of you. And that's with your titles in these books. I absolutely adore your titles. And they really serve to most of them isolate the importance of nature, and they're really poems in themselves, which I love. I used to hate titling things. It used to take me forever.
Sure.
I used to agonize over it. Yeah, so now I'm sort of kind of chilling out about it a little bit, and it's become really a fun thing. And so I wanted to let you know that I appreciate all of your titles, and I wanted you to each to talk a little bit about the titles of your books, Bear and The Slow Hammer of Roots, and how that came about, and titling in general.
Yeah, it took me, I can't remember how many times I changed the title of this manuscript. It did not start out as Call Bear, but when I got there, I was like, yes, right? You get that
Mhm.
feeling. And I think also last year, shortly after this book came out, I had the opportunity to write a little bit about how I got there. Also, I have a little essay on Poetry Daily in their object lessons or what sparks poetry feature. So there's a fuller treatment or explanation of that. I also shared there that some of this book was also written in a period of long and intense anticipatory at the time, grieving, and then it still feels like for a lot of reasons, including what we went through in the pandemic, and to be honest, these days, it still feels like there's a lot of grieving going on. So I still carry that sense with me. But for some of the imagery, for instance, I was also looking at things like surrealist poetry. One artist I particularly like is a Spanish Mexican painter. And I think the first two lines of Call Bearer, the title poem, are actually images from a painting of hers called Alegoria del Invierno, or Allegory of Winter. So it names the pheasant, the nuthatch, the five-petaled flower, the feather. And these are all like images of things that are caught in like a cocoon-like very soft, like gauze-like web or net, but they're sort of hung from these very spiky looking, dangerous looking, weird plants. So that contrast also is something that spoke to me. And the gauzy cocoon-like nets made me think about things like emergence or how we bring with us things that we were, I don't know, exposed to, encased in, formed by in a previous existence to the ones that we pass through to. And so that also brought me to the call bearer imagery, the idea of the call, which I talked about a little bit earlier, as this sort of like talismanic veil that some children are born with. And it spoke to me as someone who is a person, an immigrant and a writer in the diaspora, despite the length as a naturalized citizen, I'm still conscious of feeling being neither here nor there, really, that there is a fantasy of irrecoverable return, and here is a place to which I've carried the ghosts of my own and perhaps my community's nostalgias. So between these two states of being, I see that veil, which is perishable as a panicle or a group of yucca flowers that are sheer as the yucca moth wings also. And then I stumbled on, because of the research behind that, this wonderful I guess, story about how the yucca moth, it's not a story, it's for real, right? It's not made up. The yucca moth and the yucca flower are codependent on each other for their existence. So the symbiotic relationship that they have, the larvae of the yucca moth will not eat anything except the seeds of the yucca flower, and without one another, they will perish. So I thought that is such a beautiful image of tenderness and reciprocity that I want to carry into the world also in my life, and that I wish to see in the world that we'd like to live in together, right? So that became sort of like the driving impulse for the poems, which found their way together in this book, Bearer.
Hmm. That's
Sorry, I'm so
beautiful.
long-winded.
No, 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 it's beautiful. And I was just gonna pull, I have speaking of titles, Louise, one of Louisa's book. Oh, we can't see it, can we?
Oh,
One of Louisa's books, the title Ode to the Heart Smaller Than a Pencil Eraser. And these are, I'm fascinated by extremely creative and unique titles that actually mean something. There's something
yeah,
there.
yeah,
They really do mean a lot.
yeah.
And so I find it's so interesting to me. Lee, talk a little bit about the slow hammer of roots again. I know you did mention a little bit about roots and the meaning behind that, but can you talk a little bit about your titling?
Sure. I have to give credit because so the Slow Hammer of Roots is a line from um, one of the Future Folktales poems, but it was not originally the title of the manuscript. Um, Originally, I had taken a different line, which was longer. Slowly, our faces come into view,
Mm.
which I thought, okay, that. It's from one of the ancestry poems, but it also kind of reflected the looking back of the natural world at us and the kind of admonitory tone. It's like, trying to get us to get a grip on ourselves. But
Mhm.
a very dear friend of mine who I've known since high school, who's like my biggest cheerleader reader, that person that you're very grateful to have. He I think this was actually after the manuscript was accepted by Broadstone. He was like, I have a title suggestion. And he sent the Slow Hammer of Roots. And immediately it was one of those like, oh, well, right, of course, that's actually the title because it speaks to these different threads quite directly. Um, and the cover of the book was a similar close friend who's a painter who had been making these huge black paintings of like mycelial networks,
Mm.
and she was willing to,
Yeah, I was
share.
gonna say show it.
Yeah,
It's hard to see. It's a beautiful
Oh,
cover.
it's
It's
beautiful.
yeah.
so
There's this.
subtle and
So all of that came together kind of in a gift from God sort of way. Like I was grateful for the outside the very tender but outside perspective of my friend who suggested the title, and it sort of sewed everything up very beautifully.
yeah, it's so interesting when that happens when people on the outside, whether, especially if they're not poets and they're
Yeah.
reading your work and they're commenting on, it's like me pulling out the dictator poems or something. What the nuances and the things you don't recognize or may not think make impacts on other people or that mean something really do. And it's so interesting to learn what those things are and how that title was pulled out of there. Yeah, it's fascinating. So I would love to hear a little bit more from both of you. We're going to close with a poem from Luisa, and then Lee's going to do a final poem for us. And I believe these are the final closing poems in both the collections. Is that what we're going to
Yeah,
hear? No? Okay, Louisa,
that's
yes?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you again. This is such a rich conversation. The final poem in Callbearer is called Outrigger, and it is a fishing vessel, which in the Philippines is also very ubiquitous. It is the favored fishing vessel used by fishermen. Um, and in the vernacular, it's called the banca. So this is Outrigger. I know every robe of light is edged with a hem of dark stitching, and the sea is always racing and lowering its curtains. Once, when I put my arms around you, I couldn't hear the crash of waves. These days are loud, though, the billow of wind, the sermons of thunder, the undercurrent of all nostalgia's turning into something we only think we understand. O trigger releasing a spring, tensing a mechanism, seething with too much feeling. O outrigger, I am an island and you are an island and everyone else is an island, and we could be an archipelago.
Thank you. That's also one of my favorite poems.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful closing poem. Lee, would you like to read one last poem for us?
I loved that so much, Louisa.
So
Thank
much.
you. Yeah. Um, and there's resonance with the poem I'm going to read a little bit, although this is close to the end of the collection, but it's not the end. This is called Totality, and it is a direct response to driving from Virginia to Ohio in a mad rush with my daughter last at the beginning of last year to see a total
Mm.
solar eclipse, which I had never seen before. And we did it. We stayed in a strange hotel in the middle of nowhere, and it wasn't too cloudy. Uh, and it was so overwhelming that I tried to get at it by comparing it to the only other kind of equally overwhelming experience I've had, which is giving birth. So the poem attempts to weave those things together. Totality. The moon carries herself in a bag of black velvet, seeking some sign of herself as the ceiling of the world, holding every sunset suspended at a distance, as the plate of the world, as its curled crow in a nest of every jewel she ever found, her eyelid closing the gap between day and night. But the jewels come from my own body, the crow nudging from inside as I cry and gasp and laugh, the moon surging through a ring of fire, tearing apart my understanding, dismantling the world the way my child did, skipping ahead, wearing a crown and racing her own shadow.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
You know, these are it's such an honor to hear both of you read this work, and it's such an important lens that you're writing through, or multiple lenses. History, ecology, ancestry, culture. There's so many different lenses that you're writing through that are so necessary. So I really, really, really appreciate you being on this show and having this conversation. Um, and hopefully you'll join us again and we'll have more conversations. So I just want to thank you again, Luisa A. Igloria, Lee Marshall, for being on. Thank you, Sam, for being here.
Yeah,
And
I'd love to say something too. I just want to say
yeah.
that you are both very intentional in everything you do, I can tell. And it's just an honor to be a part of your story. But I can't wait for what else you might write. That's one of the best parts about Poet Speak is now I'm waiting for your next books.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you, Allison.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And we will be back next month with the third show of Poet Speak. And be well and write well. And hopefully we'll see you both again soon and be hearing from you very shortly. So I appreciate it. Thank you guys.
Thank you so
It was
much.
an honor to be here.
Likewise.
Thank you.